East Coast in the US, good early afternoon on the West Coast, good evening for those of you not on the East Coast in the States, and wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. We are very excited to have you. My name is Sarah Mastro, and I am on the International Board of Directors for UXPA International, and I'm very excited on behalf of our Director of Education, Abby Goodrum, and the rest of the board for this webinar today. It's going to be a great one, and we're super excited to have our presenter here. I'm going to ruin his name, but please forgive me. Dr. Lennart Nacke is an associate professor at the University of Waterloo, Stratford School of Interaction Design and Business, and currently he's the director of Human-Computer Interaction Games Group at the Games Institute of the University of Waterloo. So he's been doing research on physiological evaluation, interaction in video games, and gamification research for years. He has formed essentially a new HCI research field in doing so. He has edited a book on games user research, and he is pretty much an expert in all things user research for gaming. And we are excited that he has offered to do this webinar called Running Games Using User Research Studies for us. And we are also excited to mention that if you do love this webinar, he has graciously agreed to do a short course for us as well that will start this Friday. So once you are done with the webinar, you'll want to go back to our website and check that out and potentially register, because we are really excited about that and to have him and his interesting content for so long with us, and we really appreciate it. So I will hand it off and you can get started.
Oh, here
there
it is.
You go.
Okay. All right, so let me see if I can now share the screen on full screen. It's always the big.
While you're doing that, just a couple of, we've got the chat on. So if you do have questions, you can do the Q&A at the bottom or the chat, and either myself or Jennifer, who are here on the board side, will relay that to Lennart so that he can address them. And we'll have, I believe we're going to do questions at the end, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, perfect.
So let's see if this is working. How are we doing?
I can see it.
It's coming across?
Yeah, if anyone can't see it, please raise your hand or let us know. But I believe we're good.
Okay. I think I kind of lost the view of Zoom. I don't know where that went, but that's fine.
It's all good.
All good. As long as you can see me and as long as you can see the slides, that's perfect. So a warm welcome to everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in to this webinar tonight. We're going to go over what is really like a packed program of running games user research studies. A lot of it will be stuff where hopefully I will remind you of the way that you're running your own user research studies, but I will hopefully give you a little bit of the nuance of how you do this in the games area and what makes it so special when you're trying to do that in a games context. Now, here's a couple of links to a couple of my socials. Now, we have those available at the end of the slides as well, and I'll be sharing the link to these slides with you as well at the end of this, and so you'll be able to go over and check out the slides as well. So what are we in for today on the agenda here for our webinar? First, I want to really talk a little bit out of my own experience about user research in games, what it means to do user research in games. And then we'll go through the process of what you do as a games user researcher, from planning a study to running a study to analyzing the data to debriefing the stakeholders. And that'll be your takeaways as well. Like when you're debriefing the stakeholders, you kind of have to think about, okay, what are the takeaways I want to give the stakeholders, and what are the takeaways I want to understand from the way that you do user research. So the start of a good games user researcher is always to think about your job as a person that evaluates game design decisions. So as a user researcher, and this is true for any kind of user research, right? If you do user experience research for other companies, you're a person that helps facilitate decision-making. You're not necessarily the person that makes the decision. And this is the case in games user research specifically. Now, those of you that might have worked in the games user research space, or that have worked actually with game designers, period, will have encountered there is, over the last years, this has changed a little bit, but there is a very auteur-driven sort of approach to game design, where designers are essentially creating an artifact. They want you to have a very good experience with the artifact that they're producing. And so they have this vision that they want to communicate, that they want to bring across. And often they don't approach it in a way that you would approach it from a user research perspective, where you would say, I'll give you the data, and then based on that data, you will make those decisions. So this has changed in recent years, with user research becoming very popular in the games industry, and people really thinking about, how can I make good game design decisions? And good game design has intent behind each design decision, right? And that intent might have been an artistic intent too. And so, sometimes it works. Somebody is very skilled and very talented. They make great, meaningful game design decisions. But in most cases, you cannot do that throughout the complexity that is a video game. So to come up with really good, interesting game design decisions, you have to think, first of all, about the features that will be in the game. So you kind of concepting the features. Like what I have here in the example is a health bar, right? Like, how will a health bar work? How will that feature play out? Thinking about some of these elements will be key, or it could be, a power jump or other things. So thinking about the features first, and then thinking about how should those features be implemented? Really thinking sort of the next step from, okay, these are the features, this is how we will do the features. Now, you find that often that this is really a distinguishing factor in many games. A game becomes really popular, becomes really successful. So the feature of that game then are in the spotlight, and another developer now wants to build another game based on that, but in a slightly different way. Like, maybe it's a little bit sleeker, maybe it's a little bit faster, maybe it's doing it on mobile, maybe there's other things that will help people understand this better. So the implementation of those features is really key as you're making that decision. And now this is where user research kind of helps products really stand apart. This is sort of, the Apple way of things, if you want to call it that, because you've seen that from Apple's side and how they made some products stand apart, is really thinking about how should that feature be taught to people. Because a lot of times, if you're implementing an interesting feature and it's not something very common, you have to find a way to teach that feature to people, and just kind of say, this is the kind of interaction that we do. Now, when the new game consoles came out, the Nintendo Wii was one of the first ones. Of course, with the Switch, it just kind of picked up on that concept. You might remember Microsoft's Kinect, where we had gestural input. A lot of times, video games are really a powerful place for you to innovate in controls and in interaction. And so, of course, players will not be used to these types of interactions. So you have to think about, how will we teach that to the player, that they will experience this as a wonderful way of interacting in this example. Or it could even be as simple things as, when do you save? Like, when do you use the power jump? All of that stuff has to be taught. So thinking about that, and then the last step is kind of the core step, where you have to come in. How do we signal to players when to use that feature, right? Like, the more complex your game gets, this is an example of a strategy game. You really have to think about, how do we guide the player along to understanding that there was an intent between using that feature? If you have a powerful move in a video game and nobody understands the power of that move, then you've not communicated that well to the player. So even though you might be a great game designer that has a fantastic idea here, if you've not communicated that clearly, you might run into issues, right? And so games user research is really there to help you investigate whether those decisions have had the correct outcome with the players. Apologies. So One of the things you have to think about is, have designers taught players how to activate the special move? This is something you will find out if you do user research with your players. Have designers taught players when the special move is appropriate to activate? Have designers taught players when they should not be using that special move, right? This is as important as when to use it, when not to use it. This is something that needs to be taught often in a tutorial. You can see in this example here, I'm showing Mortal Kombat. Now, Mortal Kombat for the longest time was extremely difficult to wrap your head around. But what they did over time is they actually brought out, or they looked at their users and found there's different types of users in Mortal Kombat. You got the sort of button smashers, the casual users, and then you got the pro players that want to master every combination. And so they came up with different onboarding tutorials and ways to go through some of these core features specific for the players. This is where player personalization, or at least being able to categorize, and you see that in user research on regular items as well, where personalization really is key to have different user interfaces. You've seen it in the Creative Cloud apps that now we have different UIs based on our preferences, different ways that we can change the layout of the workspace that we engage with based on our preferences. So this is really key for games as well, to understand, when do I need the moves and when do I not need the moves? Is everything that I've designed in that game designed for the same audience of player or not? So this is really kind of key to understanding that. Have designers convinced players that the special move is worth using? Have designers ensured that players are physically able to activate the special move when required? This is another interesting thing. Often in games, things come down to timing. So you have to think about, is it even possible that I can activate this depending on how I fine-tuned the artificial intelligence or the reactions from the game world to that move? Is it even possible? It might even be something, think about Uncharted or Tomb Raider kind of games, where you have to just kind of make the jump with a precision that has very little margin for error. So thinking about that margin of error, like how big is the plateau that I'm going to land upon, is really key to thinking about how fun or how difficult that situation is. So thinking about these things is really core for a user researcher. So in a nutshell, what games user research is to observe emergent gameplay in prototypes and discover where the fun is. Sounds easy, doesn't it, when you just look at this? But there's obviously more to it. It's much more difficult than that. And a lot of the times, you have to use what's already there. And this is something that's not new to you as a user researcher. You find that if you do designing user interfaces for practical applications as well, that there are things such as industry standards and interaction standards. This is an example of previews, and you might have seen this in games yourself. Some of the examples showcased here are previews essentially showing you what move you're about to make. I think one of the first times that I came across this was when I was playing the Peggle game, a wonderful game that's also available on mobile these days. It's sort of a pachinko style game where you shoot a ball and then you have to get all the different pegs, the orange pegs and the blue pegs. And at the end of it, it's about eliminating all those pegs. And there's just a lot of randomness inside of that. But it had sort of a preview function, so a special power that you would get that would show you approximately your bouncing angle off of the different pegs, and you could get a much better estimate of how you would fare in that game world. And so this is something that is actually quite popular these days in games, shows you what kind of moves you can make in a strategy games, where the angle is of the grenade that you're going to throw. This is very common in a lot of first-person shooters these days. Or if you look in the Mario Party game, looking at the different movement types that are available to you. So it's really kind of key to understanding how some of these different interactions work. So thinking about standards that are in place already, it doesn't make a lot of sense to invent something new. So thinking about the standards that are in place for your genre or for your interaction is really key when you're thinking about your design intent and your creation of the artifact. Now, games user research is very strongly aligned with game design, but it's not the same. So really your job is to discover the gap that happens between the design intent and the created artifact, the game at the end, right? So the design intent is usually what the designers think that they are making, and then the created artifact is what they're actually making. And this is the same in any kind of user research, I would say. It is just often a much more prideful endeavor, I think, with game designers. There's a lot of pride, a lot of intensity to it, because I think a lot of the understanding is that the game designer really is an artist, and they're creating this artistic work that now you're criticizing based on the data that you've created. So it's obviously a much more interdisciplinary environment, because there's actually artists in your team, there's sound designers, there's obviously also programmers and other folks, but it's not the same as when you're designing a regular web application where you're working as a UX designer. You might even have both hats on. You might be a UX designer and a user researcher in the same team. And you kind of have to look at, okay, I'm doing the design, but I'm also doing the user research. And now I have to kind of make the tweaks as I go along. Now here you're working with large teams of designers, large teams of people with a really critical intent. And now you have to uncover whether the thing that they're designing for is actually working. Because the problem in games is often the experience is not direct, right? Like we don't have the same usability concerns that we have in classic software. In games, it's really more you're doing something and you're kind of guiding and leading the player, because you can't tell the player what to do. Like in a document preparation program, you can tell the person to hit the save button to save the document. And you can equally tell a player to save a game. But often what you do is you just save the game automatically, and you just kind of guide the player along the way so that they can really focus on the experience. They can focus on the challenge that's put in front of them. So the job of a games user researcher is to empower the designer so that they can make better decisions, and that they can actually get an evaluation of the intended effect of their decisions. Is it successful or not? So they need to understand what the designer's intentions is. And this is really the key. If you're transitioning ever from a regular user research role into a user research role in the games industry, it is getting behind that designer's intent, understanding, like really building up that knowledge that is internal to the games industry, understanding what designers' intentions mean in a games world. So you probably have to get familiar with the artifacts, so with the games, which means you have to play games as you're engaging in that design. And so really it's sort of a user research before and user research after. At the start, it's helping the game designers what the problem is. So making sure that you're clear, what do you know what the problem is, what the problem is for the design, so that the designer can then make a decision, right? So you're saying that the problem is this passage is too narrow. Players can't pass through that, so they don't see this part of your map. So please fix that. Game designers make a decision. Well, I actually really wanted this to be really difficult to find, so I'm not going to signpost this. It's going to stay a difficult part. So that's a design decision that they make. You don't make that as a user researcher. You just say this is a problem, and they decide, is this a problem that they want, or is this a problem that they don't want? And then if it's a problem that they don't want, you check if the problem is fixed. So user research comes back in, looks at the design decisions, and then says, okay, yeah, this is something that we need to do about this. So how is user research really different in games? First of all, what I said before, you need domain knowledge in games. So you really need to understand what games are, how current games work, so that you can interact with the other professionals and the participants sensibly, and that you can explain your research findings appropriately. There's no doing user research in games without actually playing games. Also no designing games without actually playing games. And the other thing is, as a general user researcher in application design, a lot of focus is on usability and efficiency. And yes, there is a case to be made for efficiency of the user interface in games, but efficiency is not the primary objective in a game. Games don't have to be efficient. You don't need to get done with a task necessarily pretty quickly because you're actually enjoying it. Let's say you're slaying a big dragon. You kind of maybe don't want to get done with slaying the dragon too quickly because you're actually enjoying the process of throwing your spells on and using your weapons and fighting that dragon. So the process itself is actually an enjoyable one. So you're not as focused as you are in usability engineering or usability testing, where you're trying to optimize something so that the process can run any smoother. But you might actually want some challenges to remain there for the players so that the players feel like they're actually experiencing that challenge quite well. Now, unintended challenges that the designer didn't want to be there, those are the ones that you want to explore further in user research. So that's something where you really have a leverage on it. And of course, there's different objectives that require different methods. What you have to know about most video games, and this is not including something with a subscription model like Fortnite or some super popular games, but most of the video game sales are happening post-launch. Like just look at the world of mobile games and whatever. A lot of those sales happen pretty quickly. So A and B testing is really difficult to do. It can happen in beta versions, but it's actually not as easy as it is with a website, for example. So A and B testing is really something if you have like longer cycles of products, if you have a subscription model or something like that, then this is possible. Otherwise, it's really difficult. And then, of course, the games industry is highly secretive about the things that they make. Is that reasonable? That's an argument for another time, but it is something that's just a fact of life. A lot of game companies will make you sign NDAs, even if you come in as a tester, and they will keep the content of the games secret from you, which makes remote games user research challenging, specifically during the pandemic. Just imagine people don't want their game leaking, so they don't want people remoting into their server and playing that game, and even some of them experiencing content that they could then screenshot or share with other people. This is something that a lot of companies don't want, and that makes it especially hard for them to test multiplayer games. One of the ways that they've addressed this is that they've built large research labs. For example, here in Canada, we've got Ubisoft, we've got Electronic Arts, we've got lots of other larger game companies, but specifically I've seen the labs in Ubisoft, which are actually quite large, and you can do a realistic exploration of a multiplayer setup there. So it's actually kind of interesting to see how these large research labs emulate these environments and how they are successful in making sure that nothing leaks and everything stays under the curtain of secrecy. Now, finally, maturity, of course. Yeah. So, oh, I just had a copy and paste in there, but you have to think about the maturity of user research in games, because the maturity is not as far ahead as it is in different stages of regular products. So maturity models in games user research are not as developed, and people are not understanding the value quite as much yet. Even though some of the first user researches actually happened in the 1970s, around the Atari times, where this was a thing that people actually wanted to see what the feedback from the players is. But really, if you're looking at maturity of the user research world in the games industry, this is something that has only changed recently. So we're looking at the last 5 years. So a lot of companies are not up on the maturity level as they would be in a regular company that has already embraced the value of UX. So there's a lot more advocacy work that has to be done in the games user research context. So what does a games user research study entail? I've already said it before. We have to start with research objectives. And this is kind of key. It's actually something that might sometimes need to be clarified. What are research objectives? Then, like, how do you design the study? And then what methods do you use for the study? How do you run a games user research study? And how do you analyze the data? And how do you debrief the studies? Now, we don't really have time to dig into all of these in depth, which is also why I'm giving this course for anyone that's interested, where we can really break down some of these things in detail, specifically the process of running the games user research study, the analysis of the data, and the debriefing of the study are all things that deserve a presentation on their own. So I'm just going to cover them on the surface in this presentation. But let's get started, because I think one of the more difficult things for people to do is, as they're running games user research studies, is defining the research objectives. And this is in generally a problem for anyone working with research objectives or research questions, because a good objective is specific, actionable, and practical. And this is kudos, of course, to Erica Hall and also to Steve Bromley, who both been influential in my readings of this work. So the idea behind that is that you really want to make sure somebody grasps what's going on, what the actual problem is and how the problem can be solved. So when you're phrasing a potential research question, you have to think about something specifically, right? Like specifically, and that you can take an action on, that you can improve upon. So do players know where to go on level 2? You're being specific. This is something that you can measure, that you can investigate. Do players understand how to use fast travel? Yeah, this is, again, interview questions that you can ask in that direction. Can players complete the puzzle in the right time? something that could be done with performance measures? Does the tutorial teach players how to use their jetpack correctly? Now, this is, again, this is a common feature. You know, they have a jetpack, they want to use it correctly. How do you do that? Is the difficulty correct? Or do players enjoy the game? And this is sort of one of the core questions is, do players enjoy the game? What is the fun of the game? How can we understand these core aspects of the game? So really, this is really hard, right? So the idea is, and this is key, you've probably, if you've done any reading on user research, you've probably run into this before, but I just want to preach this again, because a lot of the times, I have this with graduate students too. So a graduate student comes with me with like a huge excitement about a new study. Like, as you know from my CV, I've done psychophysiological studies, for example. So I'm personally super excited when somebody gets to put electrodes on somebody and measure brain activities and things like that. But this is not how you approach a research question. You don't go there and say, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could just put some electrodes on people and find something out? You know, that's nice. It's great if you have that excitement, that bias. But the good and the proper way of doing this is that you come up with a research question first. So you ask your question, this is what I want to find out. Oftentimes it's something as in, how does this work? How does a player experience X or Y? And then to look at what method can answer that question. So you don't pick the method first, you pick the research question, and then accordingly, you think about what's the best way to answer that question. So the questions always guide your method selection. Is it possible to answer the question using the techniques and methods available to you? This is really the key to it, because if you don't have a method available to you, you might have to invent a method, or you might have to invent a way to engage with that question. It's all possible, but it's something you have to think about when you're phrasing those initial research questions. And it's possible, but not guaranteed, that you can arrive at an answer with sufficient degree of confidence to base decisions on what you've learned. Now, this is important because the outcome of any user research study is that you have to give that degree of confidence back to the game designers, back to the stakeholders, the game producers even, so they can base decisions on the things that they've learned. So your research question has to be detailed enough so that the answer will provide the level of detail that somebody else can use to make a decision. And so research questions are usually, or should ideally, be put into the kickoff meetings. Usually at the start of a games user research study, you have to have these kickoff meetings where the research objectives can be nuanced, prioritized, and agreed upon. So you can, as a user researcher, you can have that idea in your head, you bring it to the kickoff meeting, you talk it through, and then you really say, this is the most important question, this is the second most important question. Have we phrased this in a level of detail that is good enough for people to do the user research? Wonderful. And put that in the report. And then, of course, the other things that you should be aware of in a kickoff meeting is the players, like what type of players the game aimed at, and what attributes should the participant for the study have. The method that you're using, again, method is informed by your research question, so there's no selecting a method without having the research objective right there. And you have to be aware that, yes, you have to make that choice at the kickoff meeting, but don't think you can't pivot at some point. Like, it's obviously possible as you're doing a study to find out this is not really answering the question. Don't be afraid to change the method as it's not answering your question correctly later on. This is something that's possible. It's actually recommended to dig deeper and get some of those results. The study dates, right? Like discussing the deadlines and dates. And this is really helpful for producers because producers have to kind of schedule out and plan when they will implement the changes, because it has to go back to the programmers or to the artists, depending on what the required changes are. And when do they schedule that additional development work? So it's really key to understanding those parts. Yeah. So the next thing is to think about who should be involved. So when you're looking at your user research team, it's also thinking about that any team members that are not present currently might also find some of these findings relevant. So somebody from the art team might need to be there. Somebody that's leading some of the programmers might need to be there, maybe a sound engineer. So you can invite them to attend that session or the debrief so that they can get that direct insight. There's nothing more powerful than having the game designer there, of course, behind the glass, but having them there and seeing seeing really what happens. Like one of the common problems that we encounter in video game design all the time is players don't look up. Game designer can put something above there. If you're in a first-person shooter, 90% of players just don't look there. They don't look up. They just look straight ahead. So like no matter how many arrows you put there, it's really hard to get players to look up. And it's, like seeing a game designer stand there and then just, there's like this hidden thing up there that needs to be shot. And players don't get it unless you really point with a big arrow or like really good environmental art. So often you use like contrast colors like yellow or red that really showcase this is where you need to shoot. This is where you need to go. And often this is like one of those first aha moments. It's like, I thought this was pretty clear. Like everything is pointing to that. If you want a good example of a company that does that really well in terms of like pointing subtly, Naughty Dog has done some excellent games, the Uncharted games, Last of Us, some really great games that do that really well in terms of pointing the players where they need to go. And finally, the build, right? Like talk about in the kickoff meeting, talk about the build, find out when the game version for the test will be ready. This is the first build that you want to be testing, and put the deadline of this build far in advance of the study, because you as a user researcher want to ideally be able to play through that build first so that you can get an idea how bad the state is. Is there something that maybe you can use a method on that you don't need to involve players in already so that you can fix this, right? So this is kind of key for that. So how do you design this games user research study? There's two most common method types that you can use, and these vary. People will have different opinions about the names for this. This is based on Steve Bromley's idea, where he kind of clustered it into behavioral methods or experiential methods, saying that for behavioral methods, you want to uncover what players are doing, whether the players understand and can perform the task as intended, so really behavioral observation kind of things. And then experiential methods, where you're asking about the experience to explore what the players think about the games. How does the jump feel? Do players like the chase sequence? Behavioral methods would be like, have they understood how to use the jetpack? Is the difficulty correct? Like how often are they dying? Can I count the errors, right? So really distinguishing between those two approaches. And then of course, this is where we can have a experience similar to running a usability test, where we're turning our research objectives into player tasks. Now, as you know from usability tests, you always need to have tasks. Now in a game or in a game test, you also want to have tasks, right? And those tasks should relate to the questions that you're asking. So if the research objective is, do players learn how to use the jetpack? Then the player tasks should be complete the jetpack tutorial. Do players discover the secondary mode for the weapon? You give them playthroughs of level 1 and 2. Do you know where to go for the next objectives? Again, level 1 and 2. Can players identify the correct strategy for defeating this boss? Complete the boss encounter, right? Like really making it clear where those research objectives can be answered is key to defining the player task. Check that off. And so by performing these tasks, you generate data. And this is the data that you then use to make your decisions. Now we're getting into the depth of actually running that user research study. What's the player doing in the game? Where do they go? What items do they use? Where do they succeed? Where do they fail? This is all stuff that you'd be tracking. You can do it through performance tracking. You can do it through observational tracking, but it's really insightful to get this kind of data. And then, of course, asking what is the player's opinion? Why are they thinking that? So for each research objectives, you have to think about how it could be measured. So you add that onto your research objective and player task, and you can look at how can you assess it. So if you're completing the jetpack tutorial, what do you do to assess it? Well, you observe if they can complete the tutorial, watching them, ask them to demonstrate how the tutorial works at the end of the session, right? Like take that extra time to have them walk you through it. By that, you can completely understand the mental model behind that. Like how are they understanding this mental model of that interaction with the jetpack? Complete levels 1 and 2. Observe if they discover and use the secondary mode in levels 1 and 2, right? Like ask them to explain what the secondary mode is at the end of the session. Check that understanding. Observe if the players can successfully wayfind between the objectives, right? If you want to see if they can find their next objectives. And usually in games that's pretty obvious, right? Like you can see the big pointer, you can see the big thing, go here, blink, blink, blink. So it's like, okay, so the game designer has made it very clear now, we've tested it with a lot of people. Turns out you need to be very explicit about what the next objective is, because players have a really hard time if you're too subtle about it. I remember talking to a game designer once, but it's in the story. They've gone through the dialogue tree. It's saying this is what you should do next. I think what a lot of people forget too is like some people, they put the game down, they don't play it, come back a week after. I don't know if you've ever done this. And then it's just like, unless the game is right there telling me, this is the next objective, blink, blink, this is where you go next, I'd be super lost, you know. I'm just like, oh, I'm not in the story anymore, but I don't want to play the whole game again up until this point. I really need to know what to do next. So, you know, it's really important to check out those next objectives. And then, of course, for the boss encounter, see if they can actually defeat the boss. Ask them to explain the boss strategy. This is good too, because if you've ever played a game like Legend of Zelda, it's actually very good because the boss fights always teach you strategies on how to use that special weapon that you picked up in that level. And every boss fight is essentially a masterclass in you mastering how to use that weapon to defeat the boss. Very interesting way of teaching and challenging you at the same time. All right, I just want to kind of spurt through the rest of it because we don't have a lot of time left, and I want to leave some time for questions here as well. But let's briefly cover some of these. Again, if you want those in detail, there's lots more to come in the actual user research class. But let's just have a quick overview of some of the methods that we're using here. So there's methods for understanding what players are doing. So the obvious one is observation. You watch what the players are doing. You look specifically for the parts where they are not doing what the designer intended them to do. So this is where you can have probing questions at the end to reveal their understanding of what's happening. Again, it's all about the mental model. Like, why did they think they have to do it? Did we put that into the right place? Now, and a really important thing in games is as well accessibility testing. And I know that UXPA has had some great past webinars where we talked about accessibility and specifically the Microsoft controller, the one button situation. So asking if the game supports people who have disabilities that impact how they play the games, right? And some games do a really great job at it, and a lot of games can do better. Now, one of the things that we find a lot at the GRUX Summit, the Games User Research and User Experience, this is like a community from the IGDA, has its own LinkedIn group, and you know, lots of interaction there from Games User Researcher, its own Discord. And a lot of the things that are talked about there is, how can we improve that? How can we make games more accessible? What are the signposts that we can put in there? And you'd be surprised in how much are modern game companies investing into making this more accessible. It's really great to see that effort. And then analytics, of course, one of the key things that you can do, you can measure it with quantitative methods, often collected as performance data. It's something that can be collected after the fact too, can be tied to accounts and whatnot. So much data that can be collected, and you'd be surprised. Read the end user license agreement of some of your games. You'd be surprised how many games are actually tracking detailed statistics and how you're playing them and just sending it back to the data centers. Okay, so the other methods are methods for understanding what players think. So this is really more sort of the experiential side of things. So interview questions, of course, asking questions to uncover the mental models in detail after the playthrough, such as how they thought a special ability worked, why did they not follow the correct path, why did they think they enjoyed the game, this kind of stuff. Surveys, of course, standard tool. You can have agreement scales, you can have ratings. You know that from regular user research. Players like to rate on scales, and it's often used to uncover questions such as, you know, do you think the level is too hard? Rank the difficulty of the level rated, and rank your favorite weapons. How does the jump feel? Open-ended questions. You know, gather a lot of participant feedback. Finally, there's also methods without players involved. One of them is actually that I haven't mentioned here is artificial intelligence-based testing. So this is something as well where people are using AIs now to test for some of the player experience throughputs, but some of the more classic ones that you can find here is heuristics. Now, this is something that you know from usability as well. There's obviously Nielsen's 10 heuristics, but there's also a whole bunch of mobile game heuristics from people such as Hezo Desivir and Janne Paavilainen and Hannu Korhonen. So a couple of really famous Finnish folks that are working on these heuristics for playability. And a lot of these principles help understand on how you can actually build a game properly. And postmortems, of course, looking at the feedback from popular sources and investigating the decisions that you made in your development team during the development of your game so that you have an idea of what to expect. And of course, you can look at postmortems of other games to inform the development of your own game. You don't need players for that. You just need to look at development processes, and it helps you understand and create better games. Okay, so these are some of the most common methods. There's lots more I've completely omitted here, but just to give you a little bit of a teaser. Now, running games user research studies, what goes into running a study? We'll just kind of briefly wrap up with this. Of course, you have to introduce the study to the participant. That's always at the start. You have to inform them. They should be giving consent so that they know what they're in for and that they're understanding any risks that the study might have. Now, as a researcher, we have to pass every study through an ethics board that needs to approve whether there's any harm that could happen to a participant. And harm, often in these types of studies, you're thinking like, what kind of harm? You're not sticking needles in people, but if you're using data, private data, there's a lot of stuff where you have to think about data sharing these days. It's really important to think about that, right? Like, what personal data are you collecting? Do you need to collect that data for successfully running the study? And how can you limit that? And where do you store it? Is it available to third-party actors? All of that stuff is important. And then, of course, screening, this is regular UX practice. You have to screen your participants so that you make sure you get the participants from the right subgroup of people that you want to target. Again, one of the things that really helped Mortal Kombat understand some of the things was being able to cluster their players into different groups of different users of their game. Performing some tasks, really important for them to go through some of the tasks that we described before, so that you can say, okay, these are the things I checked. And so for this user test, I'm going to test these 3 tasks. These 3 research objectives have been checked, and I can report back onto that. Usually it ends with an interview, because you usually have some questions after the observation saying, okay, this is an interview that gives me more in-depth information about this. And then the wrap up saying, here's your payment, here's, where you can find more information. Ideally, this is what we do as researchers. I think this should really become more professional practice as well. And here's some of the results. I know often with companies, there's so much IP limitations involved. It would be really nice if you could actually see what your user research study has actually contributed to. Again, key parts of running a study, then analyzing the data. Of course, the key things you want to do here is describe your findings. And when you're describing your findings, you always have to explain why an issue occurred. So you're not just listing the issues, you have to say why they occurred. Then you have to explain what happened next. So always cause and impact. So this is what I did. This is the impact that it has caused. Is it a showstopper for the game? Can it be addressed? Thinking about these cause and impact chains in games is really important, because in games, it's all about the actions that people are doing within the game level. It's not necessarily the buttons that they're clicking on the user interface, but it's the actions that they're taking in the level. So thinking about that is really important. And then, as you know from regular usability studies, prioritizing is key: critical, high, medium, low. And then just kind of sort your study as you're presenting it, sort your study based on those priorities, which brings us to debriefing the study, where you're sharing what was learned, really key. And the first thing that you have to do when you're debriefing at the end of your study, and this is debriefing for the user research team as well, is reminding people of the objectives. This is always key. I've emphasized that throughout this entire talk. This is the key thing. One of the key takeaways from this talk as well is, if you don't have good research objectives, you're not going to be able to have good methods. So it's really important to remind them what the objectives were, how the methods have actually addressed those objectives, and like what the audience was for that study, and how that method worked with that audience. Then the issues are presented in order of priority, of course. And then the interesting thing is to decide what to do. And there's 2 paths that you can take. One is sort of the divergent path, where you're just kind of saying, so based on these findings, these are the possibilities that we could explore, or convergent findings, where you're just saying, okay, based on this, this is what we're going to do, because this is clearly a bug, this is how to fix it. But divergent might be something as in, we've uncovered different ways to address this challenge. Maybe this can input the way that you're actually creating your game design there. Can you explore some of these game design possibilities? And I know that I'm kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to wrap this up with the last slide. Again, keep in mind, the main takeaway here is, yes, games user research is different from user research. It's not that different. One of the key factors to consider here is that in games user research, it's really very much about the impact on the experience, not so much about the performance and the smoothness of the interaction. It's much more about, why are people spending time engaging with tasks in the game? So it's not, can they successfully complete the tasks, but how are they completing the tasks? That's kind of at the key here. And then make sure that you keep in mind that you're not the designer, you're the user researcher. So you're helping facilitate the design decisions, and you're helping people understand what the designer intentions were, and are the designer intentions addressed correctly? So that's at the heart of it. And with that, I'll leave you for today's webinar. I've got so much more to talk about this, but I kind of just rushed through that last bit, and I'm looking forward to your questions. I was very excited to give this talk to you.
Can you see the question down in the chat? There's one from Donita. What are the biggest differences between doing user research for business applications versus games?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So again, this comes down to, maybe I'll just go back to that slide. To this slide here, where again, the key differences are that there's different objectives, right? Like one of the things that I talked about was this idea that games work a little bit different than a lot of regular software. So there's a secrecy involved, there's the difficulty of doing multiplayer testing, and also this idea that there is actually a lot of multiplayer stuff. Like, of course, we've got, chat applications like Slack and Discord and Microsoft Teams and whatnot, and Zoom, that you can do lots of people at the same time. But really, games are kind of unprecedented in that way when it comes to some of the multiplayer games that are out there, where a lot of events are happening at the same time. You want to be able to test those effectively. And sometimes that's not easy when this entire team has to be, sworn to secrecy and not done at a large scale. And then, of course, this thing that I talked about with the usability and the idea that challenges in games are often intentional, right? Like finding out the difference between designing intentional challenge and unintended challenges is really key for understanding games user research better, because a lot of the times the designer intended for something to be challenging. So this is, again, why it's so important to always have that discussion with the designers as you're doing the user research testing. Check what the intended challenges are and check what the unintended challenges are. And then this whole divergent convergent thing, like, is this unintended challenge actually a challenge that can be turned into a challenge that the designer might want? Or is it something that needs to be eliminated because it's actually breaking the flow of the game? It's breaking the fun, it's breaking the immersion. So I think, yeah, that kind of sums it up maybe. And there's more questions.
Oh yeah, they're coming in now. Can you please elaborate on using heuristics, including AI-based?
Yeah, so can you please elaborate on using heuristics, AI-based? So I don't think I said AI-based heuristics. There is AI-based testing. Specifically, I can link an article from one of my colleagues that's looking at some of these things in playing through different ways of or exploring different ways that a game can provide an experience. So based on, let's say, based on an example where you say a combat should last X amount of seconds, then you could train a machine learning algorithm that looks at different attack sequences that the end boss level dragon could perform that would then either increase or decrease the combat time. And then based on that, the attack sequences would be optimized for that specific encounter. So in this particular case, you would be doing a testing based on different attack scenarios. You could have, different groups of players, a medic, a damage dealer, a tank, whatever have you, and look at different configurations of that team attacking that dragon and look at, okay, so what is actually creating that best possible experience? And then you train your algorithm, you come back to the team, and you make an informed recommendation to the programming team based on that. Now, classic heuristics are, of course, things such as, is the interface very accessible? Something about the game economy, like how easy is it to trade and exchange an item, things like that. Some of the things that you find in the standard Norman Nielsen's 10 heuristics are things such as immediate feedback, right? Like immediate feedback is key in games. Without immediate feedback, you don't have a good game. And of course, this is something that many people will look towards. some of the things such as understandability, learnability is also really key to some games. So you can apply standard heuristics in games as well. I hope that kind of answers that. But I'm happy to have a chat offline, or take me up on social media somewhere. We can have a whole thread on Twitter about this if you're interested. Maybe I'll hop to the next questions because there's quite a few coming. So this is from Elena. You spoke to the memorability of directions or picking back up where they left off. Is that a commonly used metric in usability testing for games? It's unfortunately not as common as I would like. I don't think a lot of the usability testing in games that you can find these days is usability testing where you're trying to test for a session, right? Like it's very much still task focused. So you have a research objective, you complete that task that helps you answer that research objective, and then you go on with your life. So it's not as common to do sort of a long-term test where you would think of, okay, here is a way that we could come back to this, and we could look at this. So it's something that needs to become more common, because it's a very common problem, specifically for casual game players, that there is not a common understanding of that. Something that I'm pretty sure, as user research is growing, will become a much more common way of testing games. Then Steve Johnson is asking, do you have any recommendations on where to find opportunities to practice games user research skills if it's not part of our day-to-day work? Yes, absolutely. So there are a couple of initiatives. Steve Bromley, who's also written a book on how to be a games user researcher, has created this how to be a games user researcher challenge. I think that's on Twitter. I can look up if it has a hashtag or something. I think he has it on LinkedIn as well, and on his newsletter, where you're given a task, and he just kind of wants you to go through sort of the guerrilla type of testing. One of the most common things that I see, specifically for students wanting to get into this, because it's not like you can just apply to games company and test their games. A lot of students wanting to get in the industry, they take existing games and they look at a specific feature. And this is Steve's challenge as well. He's saying, okay, for this particular game, look at this feature, do a testing to really investigate how this feature works and how you would improve it. So look at the improvability of that feature. So, lots of opportunities to look at existing games and do a sort of a mock-up test of existing games. I mean, don't do the redesigns. There's this meme floating around about the UX designer doing the 10th redesign of Facebook or Instagram as a hard no-no of how you should do your portfolio, essentially. Find something small. It's actually best to just find a mobile game. Don't go AAA title, don't go World of Warcraft or Fortnite and be like, hey, I fixed Fortnite. Go for a small mobile game. This is likely going to be very manageable in terms of the game mechanics present, and look at the things that you could possibly improve, and run a couple of studies with people that should really kind of help you get a better understanding. Reach out to the GRUX Discord. That's the Games Research and User Experience Professionals Association. There's also a GRUX Summit. Again, this is I don't know if it's competing with UXPA, but IGDA is an International Game Developers Association. So it's a different association for game developers, but they have sort of this games user research community that's pretty active, that I can recommend as a starting point for people. And it's open, it's free to join the Discord, and I can give you that information. #GRUX on Twitter. You can find lots of information there. Okay, so that's maybe enough for this one. Then Sandra asked, thanks for the wonderful presentation. Well, thank you. Do you have any advice on how to do user research on art games and games that ban genre and other aesthetic conventions? That's super hard. I've actually, I've taught game design for it's like 8 years now, because I'm also a designer. As much as I love this part of my job where I'm a user researcher, I'm also a designer. So I'm kind of like wearing these two hats. But so one of the things that's really hard about art games, like think, for example, like a game like The Marriage, which I can absolutely recommend to play, like very simplistic graphics, and like looking at expressivity again here. Like, first of all, for art games, I think it's much harder to understand the designer intent. But if you understand the designer intent quite well, then you could do user research on these art games. Now, a lot of them are very auteur-driven games. So I imagine user research being very, very difficult, because it's already pretty difficult to work with somebody that has a very strong artistic expression as a designer, because usually they don't like user researchers. They don't actually believe in it. Here's a little anecdote from that. I will not name the name, but a famous game designer that I once asked to give a keynote for one of the conferences that I was organizing. And actually I was asking him too if he wanted to give a foreword for our games user research book, which actually, I should probably pop that back up on the screen again. So asking him to give a foreword for our games user research book. And he writes back to me, it's like, I just don't believe in this games user research. I don't believe it's good. I don't believe it's good for the industry. I believe designers should be free to express their intentions. So, you can see that there's a little bit of a disconnect sometimes. And specifically, if it's a very artistic designer, there's a lot of expression. There's a lot of, authorship there that might not be as open to doing this type of user research. So it can be challenging, but it can be done. If you find a budding designer that's willing to let you influence that, absolutely try it. Look for the indies. I think that's the best way to do it. Alex is asking, I was wondering if you have any advice on creating case studies for games user research portfolios. Also, really looking forward to the course. Woohoo! First sign up for the course. Okay, so Alex, creating case studies for games user research portfolios. I was actually planning on throwing out a Twitter thread in the next coming days with some portfolios that I've come across for UX in general, because I always get that question from my UX researchers that are graduating from our programs, like how do I do a good portfolio? And yes, a good UX portfolio for games or anything really is about showcasing what you've done. So it's really important that you're clear on the role that you played in the team, as well as in terms of like how you've improved the thing that you've been working with. So show clearly about what you were analyzing. This boils down to being clear about the research question, and then showing how you've applied the right method to this research question and produced an output or an insight based on that answering of the research question. So I think that's key. Really, again, it boils down to understanding and being clear about those research questions and answering them, making that visible in your portfolio. Again, I'll have more info on that on Twitter soon. Do you do stakeholder game designer interviews before you test yourself in order to formulate more targeted questions? Absolutely, absolutely. It's great to be, and this comes from Elena. So it's really great to have that game designer input before, because you want to make sure that you understand the designer intent. You cannot understand the designer intent without asking the game designer about that intent first. So you do need to have these discussions 100%, so that you can formulate really targeted questions. Really, really helpful. I recommend not avoiding that. Will the recording links be available after the webinar concludes? Yes, it will be. I think on the
website. It will be on uxpa.org. If you look at the menu bar, you'll see a spot for webinar library, and it should be up there within the next 48 hours.
Yeah. And I don't know if I can send a message to everyone, because I can probably share the link of this, copy link. And where do I toss that? To everyone, right? And then just push that out here. And this is the slide deck. So you can go there and check out the slide deck. Do you have tips for, this comes from Mandy. Do you have tips for designing for user experience for AR, XR games remotely? I will not have their, or not have their consoles and headgear. This is really, really, really good question, because we've actually been struggling with that during COVID as researchers as well, because we have so many VR studies that we're doing. It is actually really hard. Now, there's one of the things that we've done, there's a couple of communities. I have to look up the websites again, but there's a couple of communities of VR, AR, and XR enthusiasts that you can tap into. So they will have their contact information. It's like a forum. So you'll get the contact information and what kind of headset they have. And so, a lot of the times it's Oculus or Vive, but really more Oculus these days. And so you can kind of make sure that you have the people with the right gear available, and then you do it as a remote study. You can use tools like Look Back is not as easy with games, but you could do something like if it's running in sort of a virtual machine, you could feed it back through Look Back, or you could use a tool like Zoom. Any sort of screen sharing tool will do. Just so that you get a bit of feedback, you could, if you do Zoom sort of this kind of low cost stuff, you could just ask them to point the webcam at them while they're doing that experience. And ideally, you'd have your content hosted somewhere, right? So that they access the content hosted on a platform, and then you'd have some sort of tracking implemented in the game that sends back the data, because otherwise it's really hard. And then, you know, the post design, post study stuff you can do through virtual means. So you can do a user interview with them after it concludes, and just have that interaction. It's not as nice, not as easy as doing it in person, but you get recording and transcription for free. So that's a bonus, because you can just, you know, record the video. You can feed it to a transcription service like otter.ai, which produces excellent transcripts. And you have that data ready for thematic analysis, and feed it into a tool like Dovetail after, and you got yourself a great analysis pipeline ready. Okay, so that's maybe that helps a little bit. It's difficult is basically my feedback for that. I'm running over heavily here, but I'm happy to answer these questions.
There's one more question in the questions in the Q&A. What is game discovery, product discovery research like in your role?
What is game discovery, product discovery, and user research like in my role? So yeah, it's in my role, you know, it's not it's really based on the people that I work with, because me as a researcher, I usually have a contract. I'm as a contractor, so I have somebody with a specific product in this case. So you know, I probably deal more with game discovery if I was doing sort of, you know, related research, if I did a little bit of a marketing overview. Yeah, I don't encounter that as much, because I really have a specific ask, and this is usually how it goes a lot of times. It's like there's a specific ask to fix a specific issue with a specific designer, that you focus more on developing the questions than you focus on looking at competing competing means there. I don't know if that helps.
I think that is it.
Okay.
Yep, I don't see any more questions. Anybody else?
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a really good one, and we will definitely have the recording up, like I said, on the website, and then we will see you back on Friday at 12 o'clock for the short course. So if anybody has any questions about that, drop us a line at education@uxpa.org, and let us know if you have any comments or questions about this. We can get them to Lennart at any time.
Great.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.